All right, here we go with perception. So we finished up sensation, and we're going to be focusing on perception, mostly visual perception. But what I want you to notice is that the things that you see are not necessarily the same as the things that you perceive. Oh, and hello! One of the first things that you'll want to consider with perception is perspective. And we'll go through visual perspective, so I'm just going to show you some images at the beginning. Maybe this is one that you've seen online. Just in case I need to explain it, note that we have a view of the side. A giraffe would have a view of the top, so they're looking at it from that angle. Some of this doesn't require any comment. Same with this one. So what you perceive and what you're actually seeing are not necessarily the same thing. And some people can get very clever with this idea of perception. So I see it actually all the time on TikTok, where people like pretending that they're like moving somebody dance with their fingers, that sort of thing. And here we are, like, somebody like looking like the moon is being shot through a basketball hoop. And you probably remember this as a child too, as a small child, being in the car, going somewhere with, with one of your parents or relatives or something, and feeling like the moon was following you. Now that is actually the motion parallax. The fact that the moon looks like it's following you is because the moon is so far away from you. So things that are closer, so as you're driving, or if you're in a train even, like you're in a train, you're moving along, and the things that are right next to the train appear to be moving rather rapidly. And if you look in the distance and you see mountains and houses or whatever in the distance, it seems to be moving slower. And then if you look out further and you can see the moon seems to be following you. Because closer things are going to appear to move faster. That's the motion parallax. And it is a monocular depth cue. And I'm not sure if you've seen this one online. All of these plates are actually flipped upside down except for one. Now, if you look at the wrong one or the plates in the wrong order, they all look one way or the other. Like for me right now, they all like turned right side up, but at one point it looked upside down. I'm not even sure which plate it is. Some people say it's the top one on the left that's facing down or up, whatever, turned in a different direction. Some say it's the top one on the right. The point is, though, that we need to make order out of things, and we're looking at a 2D thing, so our feedback is limited. So once we get one set of information, it seems to come uniform for the rest of it because our brain has a need to simplify what it sees. This is a personal example. This is one I took in Agadel, Portugal, where they have these like streets there that are just lined with different colors umbrellas, or depending on the street, striped or patterned or whatever. And obviously I'm standing underneath the umbrellas taking these pictures, but if you look at this picture just the right way, even despite the fact that you can see the handle on some of the umbrellas, it looks like the umbrellas are curved in the other direction, so that I'm actually looking from above instead of from below. And to emphasize this point, there is the wide view of it. So this is what we were standing under when I took that picture. You'll note that Tessa was right there on the verge of having a massive meltdown. I have photos of the meltdown too. It was pretty spectacular, but I'll show you them a different day. Other types of illusions can be formed by what you're seeing in the background and the foreground here. So if something looks off with this child here, or her legs look, extremely skinny, or out of proportion in some way, it's because she's holding a bag of popcorn right here. And it blends in enough with the background that it distorts her image. And sometimes illusions can just be created by seeing a shape. Like obviously you can see the form of a dancer, their head back, legs going this way. You can see the form of a dancer in the tree. I don't know if you've seen this before. I just thought it was funny. It probably will change, and that's how constructs work. It'll probably change the way you see this in your car. Now, this image is interesting for a different reason. and trying to show you that you can't trust your eyes, despite the fact that your eyes are what your brain believes over everything. Remember that idea of visual capture. Your vision overrides all of your other senses. Now, when you look at a picture like this, there's nothing really to focus in on. But if you just sort of stare at this picture, what will happen over time is that your eyes will tire of firing and the image will go blank. So I'll just keep talking while you stare at this picture a little bit until the picture does disappear on you. I'm going to assume it has for you since it just did for me. It will come back, but it will temporarily disappear. So as I mentioned in the introduction to sensation and perception slides that we did, that it's often hard to tell the difference between sensation and perception. The boundary is ambiguous. I gave the example of chewing Starburst. At what point are you chewing and at what point are you swallowing? They're not two discrete things, they overlap. Same thing is going to happen with sensation and perception. So when you're looking at this image, if you haven't ever seen this image before, it might look like a map to you. I think that's the most typical answer I get when I ask people what this is. But if you have seen it before, or maybe you just can, it's actually the image of a cow. So if you notice, here is the top of the cow's head. There's the cow's ears going off the page there. There's his big snout, his eye right there, his nose. The thing is with this, that once you know that there's a cow in this picture, the cow will always be very obvious to you. So if you were to show somebody this picture and ask them what they saw, like, it would be confusing to you as to why they can't see the cow. Well, you know to perceive the cow, that's already been done for you. So once you see it, it's there. And remember, that's how constructs work. There's a lot of overlap here. So an illusion is when our sensations and our perceptions do not match. It can have false or misleading perceptions. It is not unusual to have illusions. I don't know if you've had this experience of driving home or driving out in a rural area where there are no streetlights and people have their mailboxes close to the road. Those reflectors on those mailboxes to me when I'm driving at night sometimes will look like a deer coming out. I have definitely, years ago, I used to hang clothes on the side of a chair in my bedroom and before putting it away, and I'd wake up in the middle of the night and be be petrified because I thought I was seeing some small man standing in the corner of my room when it was just like a hoodie hooked on the side of my chair. There's nothing abnormal with an illusion like that. So I was very amused when I saw this. It totally matches my experience. And some other illusions, some are done rather intentionally, like this. Some people are extremely artistic with their illusions. Obviously, there isn't anything there that the guy is going to dive into. There's no difference in the depth. This is another illusion that's rather intentional, where it's meant to look like a small bus parked right next to a double-decker bus, but it's actually just one bus. And some might be rather accidental, like the placement of this book in front of this woman's face. And I don't know if this one will work on you guys, but it certainly did for me. Right here, get the pointer, right here, it looks like there's been shadowing there, and the tan color matches the background, so it looks like there's a big hole going through the cat. And I can't tell you how long it took me to figure out that there weren't two people in this picture. So you can see a person here, right? And I was pretty convinced there was another person diving into the water. I couldn't figure out what exactly was going on there, but it took me quite a long time to realize that this person here, this is their arm, that's their hand, and they're holding something in their hand. Hallucinations are different. They're not illusions. We didn't spend a lot of time talking about that in class, not now at this point, but we will post the AP exam. A hallucination is an imaginary sensory perceptions that occur without an external stimulus. So illusion, you're taking information that your eyes see and you're perceiving it incorrectly. With a hallucination, Your eyes are seeing something that isn't there. Your ears might be hearing something that isn't there. Auditory hallucinations would be the most common in schizophrenia, followed by visual. Tactile hallucinations, like feeling like there's bugs crawling under your skin, that sort of thing, would be really uncommon in schizophrenia. That would be more common with substance use. And a delusion is also different. So a delusion doesn't have to do so much with your senses. A delusion is a false belief. So this is actually also pretty common in schizophrenia, where somebody might have a delusion of grandeur, like they think they're here to save the world, or they think that they are Jesus Christ. They might have a delusion of persecution, where they feel that people are out to get them. Maybe a delusion of reference, where they take all kinds of things that are kind of random and put them together and assume meaning in them. So obviously, delusions could be a problem with the psychotic experience, like one in schizophrenia, but it could also be a result of drug use. So I will go through these three basic processes of perception, and some of them should seem familiar to you, like the idea of selection, actually choosing to some extent what it is you're going to focus on. Organization, needing to put stuff and see stuff in a way that makes the world that we're looking at make sense. And interpretation is going to have a lot of cognitive elements that are going to affect how we perceive things. So to explain some of this, I'm going to give you some more pictures, a lot of pictures actually, and some examples. So here is the horizontal vertical illusion. Now, if you notice when you're looking at this, and I really should probably have made this so that the differences were a bit more obvious. But the question really is, what's longer, this red horizontal line or this green vertical line? Now, for most of us, and really, like I said, I didn't make the difference very big. I probably could have exaggerated this more. But for most of us, we will view this green vertical line as being longer, but it isn't. And the problem really is this. We, as humans, we are vertically oriented. I'm used to, being able to walk, look ahead of me. My eyes are directed forward. And I am used to, seeing a great distance, maybe not with a lot of detail, depending on how cloudy it is or my vision itself, but I'm able to see a great distance in the vertical direction. But as I look ahead with my eyes forward, there's a great limit to what I can actually see to my sides. So we as humans are vertically oriented. So vertical lines have a tendency to look longer to us. I duplicated it. And here I duplicated the slide. Then I turned the slide and move them together so you can in fact see that that red line is longer than the green line. Like I said, I should have exaggerated that difference. And here we have the Mola Lula illusion. Hope I said that right. And what this is telling you is that essentially you are going to view these two lines as a different length based on what's next to it. So if I were to just draw a line here, you will notice that the line, well, not very straight there, sorry about that, but the lines are the same. These lines are the same size. So the reason that this line here is going to look shorter than this line here has to do with what's happening adjacent to it. So when the lines are pointing inward like this, the line itself is going to look, so the inward like this, the line itself is going to appear shorter, although it is not. Over here, when the lines are pointed outward, it gives the illusion of this line being longer than it is. From a practical viewpoint, I know that years ago, where we used to live, Miguel and I were renovating our kitchen quite unintentionally, which is another story, but we were renovating the kitchen, and the person helping us was like, okay, so do you want these tiles for the floor? Do you want them on a diagonal or do you want them going straight? And I asked him, I was like, well, which way will make the kitchen look bigger? And he said, I can't make the kitchen any bigger than it is. And I was like, yeah, no, I know it. I get it. The kitchen is the size it is, but what will make it look bigger? And the guy was like, listen, I can take out a tape measure here. Your kitchen is the size it is. I can't do anything about that. And he couldn't seem to understand that I wasn't asking him to make my kitchen bigger. I was asking him what would make it look bigger. And as we see right here, just changing the way lines are oriented will actually change the size that something appears to be. Here is another example of the same illusion. And here's the Ponzo illusion. For this illusion, the same sort of basic principle here, where you have two lines that are, like A and B are the same size, but it's the background information that is going to, all this background here going on an angle like that is going to make A look like it's bigger than B. The problem really with this is that we are working with a 2D surface, but because we've got lines going this way that appear to converge in the distance, it gives us the sense that it's a 3D sort of image, which makes A look like it's further away from us than B, although it is not. And here is a real life Ponzo illusion. See right there? Same size on an actual track. So noticing the fact that like what something is near and what it's next to will change how big or small something appears to be. These little creatures here are actually the same size. This one here appears to be bigger because it has the appearance of being further away because the lines seem to converge in the distance. And just a few more examples of the fact that what you put something next to will change the way it's perceived. This is a duplicate of the same image. This image here is just copied over here. Same image, otherwise I think I accidentally trimmed off a little bit over there, but I didn't mean to. And yet you will notice that the street here appears to be at a greater angle than this one here. The angle itself is the same, it's just what it's up against. The starting point is already at an angle here, so this one looks like it's more extreme. Same thing with the Leaning Tower of Pisa. Same image, duplicated. This one will look like it's at more of an angle. But if you look at the negative space in the image, like this area here and this area here, you'll see, no, one isn't tilted more than the other. It's just what it's next to. It's that you're inadvertently counting this negative space and this negative space, which makes it look like this is how much it's leaning over instead of just that much. And you'll notice that this circle would look larger than this circle, and again, it's just a question of what it's next to. I think people ought to think of these things even when they're getting dressed. Like if you're thinking about it, you want to accentuate some things or not, depending on, you want to look, say, like broader in the shoulders, that sort of thing, then horizontal stripes would give the illusion of you being bigger. You want to look more slender in some places, vertical stripes would help with that. If you want to accentuate your hips, let's say, you want, to look more like you have, I guess, bigger hips. I don't know, whatever. Thick, I think, is the word you guys use. So you would put like a belt low hanging around your hips, and it would cause your hips to appear bigger, not to be bigger. If you did not want your hips to look bigger, then you would absolutely avoid putting a belt there. Again, another example here. You will notice that the size of this orange circle there is the same size as this orange circle here. It's what's surrounding this one that makes it look smaller than the other. If you were to just, block out the gray circles out of your visual field, kind of hold your hands up and cover part of the screen, you'll see that the two orange circles are the same size. I'm definitely disappointed not to be doing this one in front of you in class. I know I've gone over a couple of them already. I want you to notice a few things. So this is a straight line. This one I already did. This one, that is. This one we already went over. For this one here, the line segments of that square they're straight. It's the circles around them that make them look curved. You will notice here on this one that one of these looks bigger than the other. And they're not, they're the same size. My kids have this in their magic set, but it also works with like kids trained pieces. It's just the fact that like if you draw like a line down from where it's starting, you'll notice one is further to the left than the other. But the difference in size is the same. If I go up to this one, these are parallel line segments. It's the slanted lines that gives the appearance, I wish I could draw better lines here, but it's the slanted lines that give the appearance of them being at angles, but they are not. But my favorite here is this one right here. Because it's very easy to look at this one and think like, okay, so this is the wall that's closest to me. That wall is further away, and I could stand here on the steps and just go up the steps, right? Sure, no problem. But you can reverse this one rather easily and instead start with your eyes at the top here and imagine that this wall is the wall that's closer to you. Pull that towards you and tell yourself that this wall is further away, and instead of being able to walk up the stairs, now you're standing underneath the stairs looking at them. This one like kind of drives me nuts because I can go back and forth on that one. Some of you will see it right away, some of you won't. If you need to pause and look and torment yourself with it, feel free. Now here you'll notice that the image is exactly the same, except for the fact that there is this black line going over this. But if you notice that that blue line and the red line don't actually line up, that part of the red line lines up with the blue line. Once you put that big black stripe over it right here, the red line appears to line up with itself and the blue line appears to line up with itself, but it does not. And talking about seeing things that aren't there, this one looks like no big deal, right? You have, it almost looks like 2 sheets of paper that you might use to write an essay on in class. The problem with this one is that you're also seeing something that doesn't exist. I will put it there to show you, but you have a lot of little, horizontal line segments, right? And they don't line up. You notice from here to here, they don't line up. They seem to zigzag, like you have 2 pieces of paper that are just misaligned. Well, it causes you to think you see a line going here, and that line is actually not there. It appears like it's there, but it's not there. So your perception will cause you to see things that don't exist. There is no line there, and yet you will see it. Once again, here you have a situation where these 2 line segments are straight, but they look bent because of what they are up against. Oh man, and I cannot even look at this one for that long. All of these lines, all of these strips, if you will, are checkered strips, are all straight. Because they misalign, they have the sense that they are crooked. I don't know if anyone else is having this problem, but for me, they actually look like they move a little bit. And I think this is completely amazing. An art teacher painted the floor of a school to look like it was dipping down, and it prevented students from running in the hallway. I've actually seen rugs that do this, and I've been tempted to get one for my house. The worst part is, I know me, and the lack of symmetry would also drive me nuts here. And I don't know if you remember this from the classroom at school. I have this hanging in the back of the room. Here you have like this white area, right, with all of these little black rectangles. What you're seeing, though, again, you're seeing something that doesn't exist, and this is a perceptual problem that you're going to have, is that you see these like little black dots. If you try to focus in on one of them, they go away. But there is no like sort of grayish black spots in the white area. So here's another perceptual issue that we have here. We're mixing squares and what we know happens with sharp lines like that with circles and what we know circles do. It looks like these cross at some point, and you can kind of like look around trying to figure out the place where the circles would overlap, right? But they don't. They're actually concentric circles. See? They don't overlap at all. In this image, and you should notice I'm making these videos from PDFs, so nothing is moving right now, but you will notice as you look at various spots on this image that it'll make other areas appear to be moving, but nothing is moving here. And oh my God, this one drives me nuts. I hope it works for you. This bat, if you just look straight at this bat, it appears to get bigger in front of you, but it does not grow. And these are really all just examples of illusions, and I'm going to spend some time breaking some of this down and explaining why it happens. Perception is that first step in perception, choosing where to direct your attention. And sometimes we've learned, so it's not so much a conscious choice. Like obviously you hear somebody talking about you, you're going to orient in that direction. So some of that is just straight up learned. And that's selective attention, so you're constantly bombarded with sensory information. Your brain sorts out important information and discards the rest. So it's going to filter and attend only to certain sensory information. As a result of this, you will have an inattentional blindness. There will be things in your environment right in front of your eyes that you will not see because you're not selectively attending to it. I'm going to attach 2 short video clips they're totally fun. I think you'll love them. One is called the color changing card trick. And I don't want to say anything about that. The other is Darren Brown's person swap. He goes around asking for directions. And what he does is like he holds out a map. He has the person look at the map. Total strangers. He has the person look at the map, asks them where something is. I think it's Trinity Church. And they look at the map, give him directions. But while they're giving him directions, somebody will walk past with a big painting, and he'll swap out the person, and then the person that was giving him directions will continue as though nothing has changed. And what you'll see, which is so fascinating, is he's able to change to a person who speaks with a different accent, to a person that looks completely different, to a different race, to a different gender. And the only time people notice is if they're paying attention to him and not the task. Feature detectors are also called feature analyzers. They respond only to certain sensory information. So, for example, back in 1959, researchers discovered that there were certain specialized neurons in the optic nerve of frogs that responded only to moving bugs. They called them bug detectors. I thought that was cute. Cats have certain feature detectors that respond only to lines and angles. Humans, unsurprisingly, I would think, have feature detectors in their temporal and occipital lobes that respond maximally to faces. So if you remember, babies, even when they're born, remember they spend a longer time staring at things that resemble a face. So prosopagnosia is a word for a neurological problem with feature detectors where people can't recognize. Well, they can recognize a face, but they can't determine who it belongs to. So if you remember when we talked about agnosia, that failure to know, so failure to know whose face it is that they're looking at. So somebody with this disorder, again, they see you, they know that they've seen you before, they recognize your face, but they have no idea like who you are. So the horizontal and vertical cat study, this is a big deal. This was done by Hubel and Wiesel. What they did was they took little kittens when they were born, and they had noticed that, again, like I mentioned, that cats respond maximally to lines and angles. Remember, they have specialized feature detectors that respond to lines and angles. So they took these kittens and they put them in an environment much like the one you see here, where the kitten was raised in an environment where they were exposed to only one type of line, either vertical lines or horizontal lines. So the image here is of a kitten that would have been raised in an environment where they only saw vertical lines. They kept the kittens in this environment for a period of time, past the kitten's critical period, where, remember, critical periods where certain learning has to take place for maximal development. When they took the cats out of this environment, they noticed some really interesting things. the cats that were raised in a vertical line environment, like the one like pictured here, when they were taken out of this area and were able to wander freely, the cats that were only exposed to vertical lines would walk all around everywhere, but they would never jump on anything because they were not capable of seeing horizontal lines. So these cats would stay on the ground. I think what was more concerning is what happened to the kittens in the horizontal line study. So the kittens that were only exposed to horizontal lines, when they got out, they would jump onto different surfaces, no problem. But because they couldn't see vertical lines, they kept crashing into everything. This study is so important because it shows you the importance of critical periods and how your entire perception of what you see depends very much on what you're exposed to at different times of life. Now, humans don't have those extreme critical periods. But if you were raised in an environment, let's say, where you couldn't see a great distance, so let's say you were raised in, like, say, a very heavy brush, sort of jungly area, if you were taken out into an open field and had never been exposed to one, you'd be very confused by what you saw. As humans, we would learn to adapt, but it would take some time. The cats in this scenario would be unlikely to adapt to the change. See, unfortunately for the cats in this experiment, without appropriate exposure during a critical period, the cells that would normally respond to the opposite types of lines deteriorate. So habituation, we've gone over this before. Habituation is that tendency for the brain to ignore environmental factors that remain constant. Remember in developmental psychology, that little baby who's, staring at a complete stranger and the mom thinks that they're flirting and they're not. It's just that they don't recognize that face, so it's interesting, and they stare longer at things that are newer to them. It is similar to the concept of sensory adaptation, but let me paint the difference here. Habituation is a perceptual process issue. I've seen it before. I'm going to move on to the next thing. I recognize this, that's it. Sensory adaptation is when things in your sensory world remain constant, you adapt to it and fail to notice it. So if there's like a constant hum in the room, after a while, I'm not likely to notice it. With habituation, I don't know if you've had this, like you guys don't buy CDs anymore, but I guess like you get a new whatever, something gets released and you download it onto whatever it is you're listening to it on. And at first you carefully listen to all the details of the song, and you really I could really hone in on one thing, like I like the bass line or I like the drums or something about it, and I really focus in on it. And after you've heard it a number of times, you habituate. It's not as interesting because it's not new anymore. Sometimes, unfortunately, people do this with friends and relationships too, where they get bored of an old relationship because of the exciting and new possibility of something else, completely ignoring the fact that habituation will also happen in the new relationships that they're developing. And really, the trick is to know how to keep things fresh for yourself. That idea of controlling the story yourself, that you control the constructs, you control the story that you're putting something in. And so to throw in a lot of cognitive psychology in this unit, because it belongs here, that you kind of have to look at your automatic thoughts about something and keep it healthy that way. Oh, didn't realize I had done this. So again, habituation is a perceptual process in the brain. Sensory adaptation occurs in the sensory receptors themselves. And so as a quick review, remember, sensory receptors is where stuff is going to be transduced to be understood by the brain. Vision, remember, that happens in the retina in the back of your eyes, in your ears. It happens on the hair cells, in your cochlea, actually on your basilar membrane, the organ of Corti, right there. For gustation or taste, those taste buds are right on your tongue, the papillae right on your tongue. Olfaction, it's right there in the olfactory epithelium in your nostrils. All right, since we know that we habituate and we know that we adapt to things, what types of stimuli are we more likely to pay attention to? And here it is. We pay attention to things that are new, intense, moving, contrasting, and repetitious. So if you just think of commercials, new, like a talking cow might be new, something you haven't seen before. Intense, the commercial gets bigger and louder. Something that is moving, obviously, is going to catch your eye most. Contrasting, you look more towards with competition. And repetitious, we're more likely to remember it if it repeats a lot. I mean, I don't want to go out and say 1877 cars for kids, but if that gets stuck in your head, I take no responsibility. And by the way, it doesn't actually matter if you like the ad. It just matters that the ad gets your attention and that you associate the ad with the product that they are trying to sell. And when you look at this, I'm sure you all know what product this little get-go is trying to sell. Now, as we move towards Gestalt psychology, we're going to be looking more towards form perception and form organization. So again, this would be what I talked about with the Piaget stuff as an impossible object. You will note that if I look at this area here, that all makes sense. But if you look here, this seems to be behind that, but it lines up with this. So I look at this in a 3D world, this image does not make sense. It cannot exist. But in a 2D world, it's not a problem. This type of thing makes us uncomfortable. From a Gestalt perspective, we like to simplify things, which is why when you look at some of M.C. Escher's work, it can be really confusing. If you focus in on any little element of it, it's fine. But when you step back and look at the whole picture, it just doesn't make any sense. So Gestalt psychologists, they were the first to study how the brain organizes sensory impressions. They like to look at the whole and how things are patterned and organized rather than in parts. So when you're seeing something, you're looking at a scene. You're not looking at all the different component parts. You need to make things simple. Max Wertheimer would have been one of the pioneers in Gestalt therapy, or Gestalt theory. In Gestalt therapy, you'd have Laura and Fritz Perls. Okay, now this stuff is really essential. You really want to know this, Gestalt. It's German. It means the whole or pattern. This Gestalt theory, what's behind it is this idea that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, that we absolutely need to see order in what we are looking at. We have to make things make sense, and when they don't, we kind of force them to make sense. So that's the law of Prägnanz, which is a Gestalt theory. It's German for consciousness. We order what we see in a way that is regular, orderly, symmetric, and simple. Do you remember making those name tags that are hanging on the wall in my room? These principles here, closure, proximity, continuation, figure ground, similarity, I will explain them one at a time. Now, first, when you look here, you probably see the Olympic rings. But what I want you to notice is you see the Olympic rings because it's easier to see it that way. It's easier to see the Olympic rings as opposed to 5 separate rings. You're not even necessarily remembering or focusing on the specific colors, but what I want you to notice is not one of these circles is a complete circle. They are all broken. The blue circle is broken here. The yellow circle is broken over here, right? And here. So all of these circles are broken, but it makes more sense for us to see it as 5 interconnected circles rather than the broken shapes that they are. Again, when you look at this, you can look at it a number of ways. You can see it as a cube, right? The front of the cube, the back of the cube. Or you can see it as like a game piece for like Trivial Pursuit. Whatever is easier for you is the way you're going to see it. There's actually a couple of different aspects of the law of Prägnanz happening here, but among them is, speaking of cubes, it looks like you see a cube here, right? But there is none. Obviously, there's no completed form of a cube. In fact, there isn't even a drawing of one. It's white background there. What it looks like is that you have a lot of black circles here, but you don't actually even have one complete circle. You see the cube and the circles because it is easier to see a cube and a circle than it is to see these broken up circles the way they actually are, or these broken up shapes the way they actually are. So if I were to ask you to, close your eyes, move away from this picture, I guess you wouldn't have to close your eyes, but just move your eyes away from this picture and draw what you saw. If you visualize it as a cube, you could get basically the shapes of the circles right. If you're looking at the different shapes of the circles, you would not get it right. And this is probably one of the most important concepts in the perceptual field. this idea of figure ground. So the thing is that obviously you're reading, say, these words up here, right? You're reading the words. The ground is always seen as farther away than the figure. Okay. But when you're looking at it, the words are the figure and the background is the ground. So that's what you're looking at. The figure is what you're looking at. The ground is what has kind of been set back. And you're not going to focus on more than one thing at a time. So this is like one of the most common figure ground examples. You will see that the shape of a vase here, but you will also see the shape of like two faces that look like they could be like talking to each other, right? Like right there facing each other, sort of like the electric company. I'm referencing something you guys probably don't know, where they just each say part of a word. Ice cream, or it's the vase. Now, if you try to look at the vase and the people at the same time, they'll move on you. And that's the deal with figure ground. When you're focusing on something, everything else goes into the background. And this is so essential. When you look at those videos that I showed you, the color changing card trick or Darren Brown's person swap, it's a figure ground problem that we're addressing. And you want to think of all the ways in which this affects you. Like if you are going into a class and you're like, wow, this class is going to be so long or boring or whatever it is, that's your figure. That means that everything else that is happening is in the background, and your experience is likely to be dramatically diminished as compared to what it could have been if something else were in your figure. I like this because it's like a vase where you can also, an actual vase where you can see the faces, sort of a real life example. This image doesn't completely make sense, but it will illustrate the point. You can look at this man as looking straight at you, like this is the front of his face looking at you. Or you can look at him as though this is a man's face in profile and he's looking that way, like he's facing that way. But again, note, you can't see both at the same time. And that's the point with figure ground. You have one thing in your figure and everything else is going to go to the background, because that's like when you learn and how you see stuff. Learning enriches your life, but it also inhibits other possibilities. Same thing with figure ground. What you're paying attention to means that there are other things that you're not paying attention to. This image showed up on an AP exam a few years back. I think in one of the multiple choice. Is it a duck or is it a rabbit? So if you look at it one way, this could be the beak of the duck, or this could be the ears of the rabbit. But it can't be both. I show you this just because it's funny. It just reminds me of my childhood. My brother used to wear shirts that my mom thought was inappropriate. She thought that they were inappropriate. And every once in a while she would see him wearing something and say, when that goes in the wash, I have a new dust rag. And my brother was wearing this, like a black t-shirt just like this at the dinner table with a yellow bat symbol on it, like that, with the yellow and black bat symbol. And my mom said that shirt was going to go. And we were like, what is offensive about this shirt? I don't understand. And she explained it to us. She never saw the bat, and this was probably my first understanding of figure ground. What she saw instead of the bat that literally everybody else sees, what she saw is a mouse. If you picture the big ears of a mouse, peering all the way over the side of something so that the mouse's head was upside down like this. So this is the top of his head, and he's looking down at something. And what is this mouse looking at? My mom saw it this here. We're like, what the heck is this, right? She saw it as two bare bottoms, two unclothed rear ends. I don't know how to say it, but that's what she saw, and she thought it was inappropriate. And that was really the first time I realized that people could be looking at the same things. You had two people looking at the same image and seeing completely different things. And I don't know if you remember this image from my room as well, but I used it in the sensation and perception introduction slides. Remember, you have that old woman. So if you were to look at her nose here with the tight line of her mouth there and her chin kind of burrowing into her coat or whatever that is there. Or you can look at it as a young woman, and this is a necklace right there. This is her neck, and her head is turned in that direction. In that case, this is her nose and her eyes, her hair, and so the picture, the original picture, is called my wife and my mother-in-law, which I think is kind of funny, but whatever, here we go. And another example, what did you see first, a guy or a girl? Neither are really there completely. This picture is weird. And I don't know why some people had trouble with this. Like you see it on Facebook where people are like, don't say what it is if you can see it. I don't know how you don't see it. I think what's actually really weird to me about this picture is that I see it all at the same time. So you see the cat, obviously, right? You see the cat, you see it's got a mouse there, and there's some droppings on the floor, a ring, looks like a little pear or something. But you'll also notice that this is a woman's face. There's the woman's eyes, that paw is her nose, and this became the mouth. And like I said, this one is weird because I can kind of see both things in the figure at the same time. Here's another play on that, which I just think this is really cool. And talk about good timing. Does that eye belong to the woman or the bird? I don't think this one needs much of a comment. But you'll notice that if you see it, you could see it as a dog wearing sunglasses, or you can see it as a woman. And once it fixes for you, that should be what you basically see. I thought this was cute because they were working on figure grounds using the negative space. So you take, who has time for this with newborns? But here you have it. So this family taking a picture with their newborn where the negative space was in the shape of various animals. I can tell you my kids' photo albums do not look like this. Another figure ground thing where it looks like you have almost like a chess pieces, or like columns. And in between them, if you look in the negative space in between, it looks like you have people there with their heads bending over. And how old were you when you learned there's an 8 in the middle of the 8 of diamonds cards? Right there. And another figure ground issue. So when you look at this picture, the first thing you probably notice is the guy's missing tooth right there. But not his missing eyebrow. That's actually a sign of a good ad. I don't think this one needs much of a comment. I'm not able to see it as anything else but a T-Rex fighting over a table saw. And obviously some people very intentionally pull that off. So in Jurassic World, here you have the shape of a dinosaur up here. Or in the Toblerone candy bars, you have the shape of a bear in the mountain. Picture of a crow is interesting because it's actually a cat. This head turned at an odd angle. You're just not getting the reflection over here on the eye. Okay, I thought this was cute. I have this one in my room too, this All is Vanity. This is another one where I can kind of see both at the same time. So you should be able to see a woman sitting in a chair here, looking in a mirror with various cosmetic products on the table in front of her. You should also be able to see the shape of a skull with the eyes, the nose area, the jaw. So proximity, this is another Gestalt principle where objects that are physically close to each other tend to be grouped together. So if you look at this image, you probably see either 3 or 4 groupings of dots. So you see like a grouping over here, grouping over there, grouping there and there. Maybe you see this one together. But the ones that are closest to each other, you associate together. And if you think about why this is so important, I'll give you an example. Somebody I know was teaching an AP English class, not at our school, and they had a few kids in the class that were difficult, just the teacher tormentor types. And this teacher, just this group of kids in there, they were tormenting her. She was having a tough time with them. At the end of the year, she was putting them into groups, and she asked everybody to put on an index card 3 or 4 people that they would like to work with. And she said when she's making the group, she'll try to make sure everybody's working with somebody that they would like to work with. Well, one kid that she had associated in this group of kids who had been bothering her had actually written on his card, anybody but, and he named the other teacher tormentors. And that was the only time she had realized that she had associated this kid with the group of kids that were bothering her simply because they were sitting next to each other. And you want to think about that. So like if you go into a class and you're good friends with somebody who you know is going to be a pain in the rear in class, if you sit next to them, you get associated with their antics. You start a new job and you don't want to sit at a table with somebody who's going to be chatting all the way through your boss's meeting, because you will get associated with that negative behavior. Just as you might associate seeing you see a man and a woman walking down the street, you might assume that they are a couple when they are not. They could be brother and sister or just merely friends. Continuity, this is where objects that continue a pattern are grouped together. Remember that the idea here is simplicity. So if this here is the original image that we're looking at, and I were to ask you to recreate it, you would probably break it down into this pattern first and that pattern, or this one first and then that, but you'd add these two things together. You'd be unlikely to see it like this in these little segments because it's more complicated to see it that way. The first two options here, this one and this one, are simple, and so it's easier to see it that way. So when you're looking at an image like this, if you look at A here, we are more likely to see it as here's one line and there's the other line, right? Just like it is illustrated in B. We're not likely to see it this way, where it's, okay, you have that line there and this line here. We're not likely to see it that way because that way is more complicated. A closure is the tendency to see a finished unit from an incomplete stimulus. This is one of the things that you were doing when you saw a cube when there wasn't one, and you saw circles when there wasn't one, or you saw it looked like two sheets of paper and there appeared to be a line down the middle, but there was no line. So again, when you're looking here, these images appear to be like right over here, this appears to be a triangle, right? But it's not actually completed. The square isn't completed. The circle is not complete. On the face, that's not complete, but we tend to close and finish off forms in our mind. We see the circle, we see the triangle because it's easier. Just as when we were looking at this picture and it looks like a panda, you'll notice only the black parts of the picture are drawn, and if you focus on them, they could be making an entirely different image. But you see the white part that you assume is part of the panda as being separate from the white that you see as the background to produce the image of the panda, because it's less complicated than trying to figure out what the other forms in there might be. Just as when you look at this image over here, you see a triangle where there is none. The white of the triangle would match the white in the background. Really what you have are like three Pac-Men facing each other. And because we like things simplified, if you look at the top image, and here we have a cube again, you see a cube because it looks like they're parts of the cube, like it was drawn and parts of it were erased. The top one makes more sense to us than the bottom one. It's also a cube. The problem is that the lines here seem to be closed, and so perceptually, we will have a tougher time seeing this as a cube than this, although the basic shapes are the same in both. We tend to just like things to be simple. There you go. Here, you're seeing circles and triangles, none of which are completed forms. You've closed them in. See, you're seeing things that aren't there. Speaking of seeing things that aren't there, you could probably read this shirt. Intelligence is the ability to adapt to change, Stephen Hawking. If you focus entirely on the top image there, it looks like it's saying science, but when you remove the bottom, you see that it isn't. And this actually goes back to, if you remember in the cognitive unit, the idea of heuristics, the shortcuts that we take. So when you're looking at the words on a page, you don't read every single word, you don't read every single letter, and you focus on some aspects more than the other. You focus on the beginning of something more than the end, the top more than the bottom. And heuristics, because they are shortcuts, means that you're going to be making mistakes in them sometimes. You're going to see stuff because it appears to be that way and you don't have the right information to tell you otherwise. I'm just going to leave this here. Again, goes to the problem of heuristics. Those shortcuts, you're not reading every single word, and you're not focusing on every aspect of each word that you're looking at. So mistakes like that are going to get made. So obviously, I don't know what school hung this up, but this was really poor planning. I think what they were intending to say is, you matter, don't give up. But instead, people have a tendency to read left to right, top to bottom. We are well practiced at that. So it ends up reading instead, you don't matter, give up. That's horrible. There should be some sort of a thing separating it here, or they should have put it in a different order. Honestly, I'm not even sure if it was intended to be that way. It's pretty horrible. Okay, for similarity, similar objects are grouped together. So if you look here at these images, the images that are similar, like the darker circles here, tend to make, we tend to group them together, so that would look like the number 5 to us. Here, we're likely to see a blue line, a red line, a blue line of dots or whatever. We group the triangles that are green together, or maybe we focus on the ones that are pointed in the other direction. But we take some aspect that's similar and we group them together that way. I think you can imagine all the problems this causes. So more examples of similarity here.